Hello, my name's Katie Sando and welcome to the Marketing Forum podcast, where we learn about the professional world of brilliant marketers, communicators and creatives. In this episode, I'm joined by the wonderful Poppy Naylor. Poppy is a marketing and fundraising consultant based in Cornwall. She spent 12 years at Cancer Research UK, initially starting on a graduate scheme and ultimately ending up as head of campaigns. She still specialises in the third sector and she works with national and local charities across the UK. We deal with everything in our conversation, from Trixie boards. I get a little bit annoyed about ageism, which is a little bit of a detour, and how Cancer Research structured campaigns. Poppy has such an infectious enthusiasm for marketing and fundraising and a huge amount of experience to share, so please enjoy. Hi Poppy, thank you so much for joining me for the Marketing Forum podcast. So for people that aren't aware maybe of you and your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background overview on what you're doing now, and then we'll skip back into the past and work out how you got here?
Absolutely. So I'm now living and freelancing in Cornwall, which is how we first met, which I love, working with a whole range of charities, mainly charities, because that's predominantly my background, consulting for them. So a whole range of things really, from marketing strategy to some bits of delivery, and a lot of, I think what I provide for a lot of people is just an external lens that looks at the whole suite of work that they're doing and helps them think more strategically and creatively about what they're doing and what they need to do going forward. So clients I'm working with at the moment are Crisis, the homelessness charity, the British Red Cross and UNICEF. So 3 really great organisations to be working with.
And you actually jumped straight into the charity sector from university, didn't you?
I did. I was really lucky to actually have guaranteed a place on the graduate programme at Cancer Research UK before I did my finals, so that meant I could
chill
quite hard, relax, enjoy that summer. But it was a brilliant scheme. And well, actually I should say before that, I think my passion for fundraising started at a really young age. So probably at the age of about 5, I remember being in reception for, I think, the first Red Nose Day, and just being really kind of mesmerised by the idea of fundraising and creative, fun ways to generate money, and kind of really seeing that kind of very kind of old school kind of thermometer of money coming in, and seeing that grow and being really kind of passionate about getting that higher and higher. And it fundraised kind of throughout my childhood, throughout my teen years, and actually at university, which I think was one of the things that helped me get onto that scheme. I was fundraising, and the university had a big kind of student fundraising group, so doing lots of active stuff there, things like sponsored 8-legged pub crawl, the kinds of things that you don't really want to be the person responsible for insurance over, and also did quite a lot of telephone fundraising, so calling former alumni to generate funds. And I think I really got this kind of real curiosity about I guess both kind of being purpose-led, doing things for good, having an impact, but also understanding why people gave, what was behind that, and kind of really wanted to find out more. So at Cancer Research UK, it was a great scheme, 2 years, 4 different placements across marketing, communications and fundraising, so a real breadth of learning, and part of a great kind of group of, there were 8 of us on the scheme, and we were quite a force to be reckoned with, but we were able to just do so much in that time. So things like we thought that Cancer Research UK should have a youth brand, so in our spare time we created one and took it off to Manchester University and tested it, and just really great ways to kind of learn, and some brilliant people to learn from as well.
God, it sounds like such a great, some of the graduate schemes you just feel probably don't provide much flexibility or learning, and it's almost just like you're in some kind of churn out machine. It sounds like it was actually a really great program in terms of some freedom and power.
It was brilliant, and it's a brilliant organisation. We were only the second year of intake, so I think the organisation was still getting used to it. But it was really well structured, really well resourced. We got loads of time from senior, brilliant people. We were empowered to ask questions, to find things out, which probably meant we were really annoying at times. But it was such a great position to be in, and we also got involved in everything. So it was, as a charity that does so much, so we'd be volunteering at events, going out and meeting supporters, kind of once in a lifetime experience. I'd say, feel really privileged to have done it.
Talk to me about, from your point of view, then the connection between fundraising and marketing. So for you, are they one and the same, or are they sort of different disciplines but the same?
It's a really interesting question, because they're often seen very separately. And I've been in conversations where people have said, "Oh, you're a fundraiser, not a marketeer." And for me, they are really similar. They stem from the same place. It's about understanding people and what makes people tick. And I think, I'm quite a nosy person. I think my love of both disciplines is kind of born out of curiosity, just really understanding that insight behind what makes people do what they do, and what's going to drive them to respond. So actually, a fundraising campaign is very like a marketing campaign. It's creating a really compelling message piece of comms that is going to enable somebody to respond and take action. It just so happens that in fundraising, that the product is slightly different, and often not physical in the way that biscuit is.
Yeah, right. Do you think then there's lessons that could be learned from businesses, in the sense that, so with fundraising, presumably it's much more like purpose driven, so it's okay, it's a message and it's a campaign, slightly different result, but people have to really believe and they have to buy in. Increasingly with commercial businesses and brands, particularly the younger generations, are really, they need to buy into the whole ethos, not just the single product.
Absolutely. And the younger generation, I can say that they're much more choosy, which and they're much more empowered to do what they want. They really kind of investigate kind of where they're going to be spending their money, what they're going to be doing, and which probably links to the fact that there's so much more transparency around what they're doing in terms of things like social media. But I think there's so many lessons to be learned. So I think in terms of a fundraising product, you're selling change, really. You're identifying a problem, creating that kind of belief in why that is an important problem, and you're showing what you can do to solve that problem, or create some change along the way. So you're really having to work hard to create that belief, to create that relevance, and to create that empathy in terms of getting people to respond. But both in terms of fundraising and in marketing overall, it's about really understanding that audience first and foremost, understanding what they need, what their needs are, how you can serve them, how you can tailor what you're doing to them in the most relevant way, and how you can make them respond.
How often, when you work with charities, do they do that kind of initial investigative piece? Because I do think that it is a challenge for SMEs. We don't, a lot of the businesses within an SME market or micro market, they don't have loads of resource to chuck at research, and and I think for a lot of businesses it's not within their usual day-to-day. They just don't do it. Is it predominantly research, which is where charities get that kind of insight and knowledge, or is it more just built into the fact that because they're responding to a problem?
I think it's a bit of both, and I think for both charities and SMEs, it's about actually really taking things back to basics. So there's something about the simplicity of a charity that is first started up, much like a startup business, that the problem it's trying to solve is really clear, and that the message is really clear, and so understanding who is going to respond to that comes quite naturally. I think where you diversify and you almost start to focus more on the organisation and what the organisation's doing, that's where you kind of lose that relevance.
Sure. It's I think in some ways, I think it's easier in SMEs, because if you're, for example, in a marketing role, you're often closer to what's going on, aren't you? So you're more engaged with like ops, and you're probably around the directors and stuff, so you're closer to what the business actually does. But then equally, I think there's a danger where you can sometimes forget that you actually need to be really close to the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you get more into the mass marketing space, that's where it becomes harder. And that's where you need to really watch what your customers, what your supporters do, listen to them, get their feedback. I mean, there are very sophisticated ways of doing that, but I think even very basic things can work. Asking questions, offering people surveys. It's just that kind of basic premise of listening. If you've got social media channels, looking at what people are posting, responding to that, creating that dialogue, so that you're really building that kind of bank of insights. I think there's also something about really listening to people who are having that frontline engagement. I always remember I was in a product development role on the digital side in one of my roles at Cancer Research UK, and we got some great insights that were emailed through from a young guy that was on the customer services phones, and he wasn't his role to do it, but he said, noticed that loads of people over the last 6 months have been calling in saying they'd really like to give donations specifically for weddings instead of wedding gifts, but we send them out a donation form, but could we do something more customized? And a whole new product was born out of that in terms of wedding favors, which went on to do great partnerships with big designers about those, creating a really great product that raised huge amounts of money for us. And actually, it's been something that has gone further in the sector. And that's just, I guess, someone showing their initiative and responding to a customer.
No, that's great. I completely agree. It's like I think it's not about necessarily getting cold hard data. It's about like a bit of a litmus test just to see to kind of like test the mood. I totally agree that it's really useful to have conversations with people that are on the ground as well. Cold hard data is really important too, though, and I think we are lucky that we're in a world where that is so much more readily accessible now. Although that doesn't come without its own suite of problems. I think there's sometimes a danger that there's so much data available that you can kind of get dazzled by it and kind of lose what that kind of core golden thread within it is. So I think it's really important before you even look at your data to really be clear on the questions you want to answer. Sure. You get a bit of paralysis, don't you, sometimes? Yeah. Like even like on Google, I think I remember at the early days of Google Analytics dashboard, and you're looking at it and you're like, okay, there's a lot going on here.
And it's about really turning that data and insight into analysis and into understanding and working out what those kind of key metrics for you are.
I definitely think though there's an element where I don't want to generalize. Most marketers, I think, do have that kind of curiosity around whether or not about human behavior or about like triggering a response or just getting people to like something. I think we all.
And I always think it's because I always talk about it being kind of this mix of science and art. So there's that kind of logical part of it. You want to see how people respond and build up that kind of ongoing picture over time. But there is the kind of art piece, which is the kind of creative lens, the gut instincts. And I think that's why I do think that's why people are passionate about it. Is it kind of mix of both? And it is that curiosity, that nosiness as well.
For me, like it was because I absolutely love business, and it was the only way that I could see that I could work in business but still be quite creative. Anyway, whatever. Talk to me about Cancer Research UK then, because you were there for quite a long time, and by the time you finished, you were head of campaigns.
I was. I mean, I know I don't look old enough, obviously. I was there for 15 years. So I had a brilliant career there, and it was a hard decision to leave. I could have happily grown old there, but I wanted to move to Cornwall. I had kind of different priorities once I had my son, and wanted the flexibility that kind of freelance life would offer me. But so head of campaigns when I left, and campaigns in that sense. So it's a big organisation, and campaigns in that sense was around the kind of mass marketing and fundraising campaigns that kind of really tried to galvanise the nation, I guess, around a particular moment. So the biggest one was Stand Up to Cancer, which is a telethon between Cancer Research UK and Channel 4, which happens annually, started in 2012, and is all about a moment in time where people really take a stand against cancer and raise as much money as possible.
Go on, sorry.
No, so it kind of culminates in the TV show, but there's a huge campaign in the run-up that involves people fundraising in sorts of different ways. I guess the point of these campaigns is to enable as many people as possible to get involved, fundraise, take part in a way that is relevant to them. So ranging from merchandise to kind of grassroots fundraising, people doing wild and wacky challenges, to events, to that straight donation on the phone or online on the night of the TV show.
And talk to me about then how those campaigns are structured, because I know you mentioned before that you actually had a surprisingly short lead time when you first decided
for the first Stand Up to Cancer show. Yes, we had 6 months between agreeing with Channel 4 that we were going to go ahead, and agreeing with the US Stand Up to Cancer brand that we were going to use their brands to actually launch in the campaign. And it was it was a 2012, so it was a busy year for the UK as well, because we also had the London Olympics happening in the run up. So media and the public were kind of saturated. So we had to think quite creatively about how we were going to launch in a window that kind of gave us the opportunity to make some noise as well. So I guess two things to say about that. One was ways of working, and Cancer Research UK is a big organisation, as you know. It is very agile in nature. I think there's a lot to be said about an organisation that has science at its heart. That kind of ethos of kind of test and learn, striving forwards, does, I think, play a role across the whole organisation. So in terms of how people operate, how people work, but it nevertheless, as a large organisation, you could sometimes move slowly. And what we had to do to get the campaign off the ground was kind of tear up the rule book and just keep moving, have fewer people involved in decisions, and work on the basis that things weren't going to be perfect, but we needed to do the best we could within the time frame to get something out there. And and getting the campaign out there, launching, was going to be ultimately the biggest win. So there was lots of learning there. And then in terms of the campaign itself and kind of orchestrating that, it's really thinking about breaking it into phases and thinking about how you kind of generate that interaction with your audience. So I think for a big campaign that is going to really kind of cut through in the public's minds, it's about really agitating them first of all, getting them thinking. So that was about kind of really kind of seeding the messaging that would make people think. So there was a big, we were really lucky to be working with 4 Creative, Channel 4's creative arm, to kind of get some great ads out there to create that noise. I think it's then about really getting people to identify with the campaign. So if something's made them stand up and think what makes that relevant to them. So really thinking about involving different members of the public in that. It's then about getting them to take action. And then there's something about that kind of culmination and celebration. So that's what we used to do with the kind of night of TV. That was almost the big moment at the end, and some amazing TV with with some really brilliant celebrities involved was kind of that reward for kind of the kind of taking part throughout.
So when you talk about the so kind of like you're looking for the pain points, right? So you're looking for to generate
well, there's kind of the shocking stats around cancer were kind of what we used to kind of create that first agitation. So we had a big campaign about changing the odds. So the odds of getting cancer, and they've probably changed again since then. But talking about how the odds are so high of people getting cancer.
So 1 in 2 now, isn't it?
Yeah, but actually it's up to us to change those odds and really giving, enabling people to think that actually this was something that they could get behind as well. It wasn't just something that scientists are going to do on their own in the lab, or that we should expect the government to do. There's actually things that we can do right now. So seeding that story. So it was kind of shocking with the message. And it's interesting because I think that kind of 1 in 2 message almost felt like white noise to me, because I've kind of heard it so much over the last 20 years. But kind of I think this is an important lesson to learn elsewhere. Sometimes the things that you think are obvious, actually the public at large don't know, so they can still really resonate and have that cut through. And actually they can do that year after year. And that's going on a slight tangent, but I think that's really interesting to think about in terms of creative, because I think often as marketeers we're kind of inbuilt to think about new shiny creative every year, but actually there's something around really thinking about the longevity that some of that stuff has. And it can last a lot longer than we think it can. But so no, it was about seeding that stat, making people sit up and think, and then saying, actually, that is a big problem, but you are absolutely part of the solution, and here's how you can get involved.
It's kind of like changing the story around it as well, isn't it? Because I think, even if you're aware of the 1 in 2 stat, it's one of those things that you probably kind of, it's a hard, it's certainly with things like cancer, that's a hard fact to chew over in any kind of meaningful way. And so I think that, these campaigns really help to kind of contextualize and also make you feel like you can try and do something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking back to Stand Up to Cancer's roots were in the US, and it was actually it's started by a couple of Hollywood directors there, and actually one of them had been diagnosed with breast cancer and really wanted to make a stand, wanted to do something, and she thought, actually, what can I do? What I can do is get people within the industry together and make some noise about this. So it was always at its heart been about people coming together to collaborate and make a difference. And using a moment in time to really generate a kind of large injection of cash to move things on. So there's something about the kind of time-bound urgency around campaigns as well. And I think for some causes, that kind of urgency is very natural. It forms kind of part of the fabric of what they do, and that can really be a great mechanism to response. But for lots of causes, that's more challenging. And it's been really interesting over the last year in terms of the response to coronavirus, seeing how actually for many more charities that emergency mechanic has been something they can test out. Well, very, very much by necessity, but that they've seen great response from.
One of the things you talked about when you first started with Stand Up to Cancer was the lead time, and that you had to kind of be really quite agile in how you developed. Is agile methodology, I think it's so personally I feel like it's in many ways it can be common sense, and I think for some people they just, it's not really on their radar that they would necessarily name it as such. But is it a methodology that you kind of consciously use?
So I've worked with a lot of organisations who do. So I've dipped in and out. It's not something that I use on a day-to-day basis, if that makes sense. But I think the premises of it are almost ingrained, is what I would say. Which is a bit of a roundabout answer, but
No, I completely agree. I'm the same in that it's not as if I've gone off and done some kind of like agile course. But what I really subscribe to is this idea of that you can really strongly test through minimum viable product, and that you can build and you can do the things that have the most impact first. You know, it's a lot of those kinds of
and a lot of it is around clarity around roles and responsibilities, really being clear on the problem you're addressing, focusing on how you best use people's time, how you collaborate more effectively. For me, it is absolutely common sense.
Yeah, I'm the same.
But I have seen that kind of methodology absolutely transform the way that teams operate in a really positive way, particularly large organizations. And I think it kind of giving people the framework and the release to really kind of empower them to crack on and do their jobs in a really great way. I think it's interesting because there probably is a greater level of ambiguity in terms of working that way, but there's a lot less in some ways as well, because I think you're much more defined on what your task is, that the way of working, maybe coming together very regularly but very quickly, kind of there's so much to be said for it.
I think certainly with campaigns, it's if people are working on campaigns, it's a really useful tool from a marketing perspective. I don't know, it's like with things like software and various, it's like ingrained, like a lot of them do it, and religiously. But certainly I think it's something that within campaigns, it's something that can be really a valuable tool.
Absolutely.
I know you were joking when you said that you don't look old enough, but it's actually a point that I really want to talk to you about, because I still sometimes find that in certain conversations, I'll sometimes get categorized as young. I was in a meeting the other day, and there was a young designer who's at least 10 years younger than me, and it was kind of like, oh, Katie and the young designer. And I find it interesting, not from an age perspective, but because I feel like there's a categorization around, it's a statement around experience, the fact they're even noticing it. I'm really interested in your take on it, because I feel like it's a male thing. And you do a lot of work with boards, and we know that there's still a lot of male boards out there. Do you experience that? How do you deal with it?
It is a really good point. I think both the age thing and the female thing, I think there can definitely be certain responses to that. I think being a freelancer, being a consultant is very liberating in so many respects. And I think one of the elements of that is you can really pick who you work with. And so I think that kind of initial kind of rapport, that initial creating that relationship, getting a sense of who the decision makers are, how they're going to work with me is so key to kind of any project that I take on. So I have experienced that. I think sometimes I take it on as a challenge and wants to surprise them. Sometimes I would say I would just walk away from that, because actually if you're not going to get the traction that you need, you're not going to be taken as you want to be taken, then move on to something else, where you can really have that impact, is what I'd say.
It's a really interesting one, because I think that you can really dissect those kinds of comments, because you sort of think like, it's interesting that you're even making reference to age. So I think there's plenty of examples of people out there who have got old but haven't necessarily gained experience. And there's plenty of examples of younger people who have really accelerated their experience through a number of different, for multiple reasons. And I'm always interested by any kind of age commentary. And I do think it's a female thing. I think it's also a blonde thing, because we look younger. And I think
not after lockdown.
Blonde, soon to be grey. But I think that it's I just find it an interesting where that comment comes from. Does it come from threat? Does it come from mistrust? Does it come from, and I do think it's something that we should talk about as women, because we're, especially in the marketing creative space, I know it's not uncommon, and we are often female. But I think, like you say, it's easier when you're a consultant, because you can sort of say, like, actually what I've just detected is a complete lack of respect.
Yeah, and it was really true. I hadn't, it's good to call me out on that comment I made as well, because I'm perpetuating the challenge.
No, not at all. I'm not trying to call you out on it. I'm more sort of saying, like, I know you're joking, but what's interesting is the fact that you're aware of it. You're aware of the fact that people assume that we are young.
Yeah, so true. I mean, it's interesting as well. I think there's something about starting in an organisation at a junior level and working your way up there as well that is linked to that. So I think there's almost an ingrained sense of hierarchy within that too. And it's interesting, moving away from an organisation where you've essentially grown up. I was 21 when I started at Cancer Research UK, and no longer 21 when I left, nearly. And it's interesting kind of stepping away from that into other organisations where you're known for the first time.
I definitely think there's an element where it's hard for people who knew you when you were young, and in anything, whether or not that's a local sports club or whether or not it's a business, it's hard for them to see you evolve. But this is one of the things that I find it so interesting as well, like this sense of there's quite a lot of theory around at the moment as to how experienced are you. We always ask come to the job interview, what's your experience? What we don't ask enough of is what's your capacity and interest in continued learning. And I think there's this element sometimes where you assume you hit a certain age and you know things, and whereas young people serve to keep learning. And actually, it's
it's so true, that experience point. And it's really limiting, actually, isn't it? And I think how do we really give people the opportunities to move forward? I mean, one of the things I would say about Cancer Research UK is they were brilliant at allowing people to move around the organisation and investing in them, to whether that was a sideways move. It was interesting, when I left the grad scheme, actually, I took a conscious decision to take on a role within the digital team, because that was a really interesting space to me. But it wasn't a manager role, and everyone was very shocked that I was taking a more junior role. But actually, that move into an area that I could see was an area of growth, and an area that I was really passionate about, enabled me to move up that trajectory more quickly than others who maybe took what felt like this kind of step up more directly.
I think that's a really interesting lesson, though, isn't it? Because essentially what you're saying is, it's a kind of, I'm going to translate it and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think what you're saying is you've got to have an ownership over your own decisions around how you progress and how you learn and what you experience. I do think that's really important. I don't know if you listened to the Judy Blakeburn podcast, but she said, we have to hold within our minds at all times where we're going and our own progression. And I think certainly when there's challenges as well, it's about being constructive rather than
absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting thinking about that. I have moved sideways, downwards a few times just to get different levels of experience.
But that you were driven by your own curiosity and passion, as opposed to some kind of egotistical.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always try my best not to swear on these, and anybody that normally works to me knows that I'm a perpetual cursor, so I'm trying my best. So one of the other things I wanted to chat to you about was your work with boards. So aside from I probably sound like I've got a massive chip on my shoulder about coming across as young, but aside from that, the work you do with boards is I'm really interested in it. How are you normally brought in? Is that because they've identified a problem?
Yes, generally. So generally it will be a quite a specific problem. It might be, I'm trying to think, it's hard to give examples without giving things away. A problem that they want to identify, and the way the board would be involved is normally the CEO or the exec director of fundraising who will bring me in, but the board will often be will be the decision making process. So I normally meet them in that capacity. I think normally what I am playing back is not just an answer to the problem that they were creating, but probably a set of kind of further set of problems that they may or may not have been expecting. And I think it kind of really depends on what the situation is. I think sometimes people bring in an external because they want to put a mirror up to what they already know, and they just want that external validation. Sometimes they bring people in because they're really floundering and just don't know where to start. Sometimes they are forced to bring people in.
Yeah, right.
So it's a real range of ways, but I think
well, I guess so. My question is more around: is it when you have to? Is it often that in terms of formula, you're listening and then presenting back, or do you get given kind of scope to do your own research?
It really varies. So sometimes I'll be asked to go off and do a strategic review of an organisation. So that will be quite in depth. So I'll be speaking with a whole range of stakeholders at all different levels to get a really kind of rich understanding of the problem. Then I'll be playing that back. It really depends on the board. Some will work in a really informal way. They might appoint a couple of trustees to kind of work with me in a kind of subcommittee capacity, and we might have quite an intense relationship over a short period of time to working quite collaboratively on solving that problem. Others will be much more formal and be very much this is the playback, over to you to make the decision. So it kind of does depend on the makeup of the board. And I think boards are a really interesting construct, and there is lots of change happening in that space, lots more change that needs to happen. I mean, we're talking about age. It's interesting sometimes that you go in and meet some of these boards, and I am going to stereotype, and I know this isn't by any means true across the board, but often they are very male, on the older side, and often they don't have a lot of daily contact and insight into the way the organisation is running, and I think that can be really challenging when you're trying to really kind of dig deep into the organisation and share what you're seeing. Equally, I've met some fantastic boards who, as I said, work really collaboratively, are really passionate about getting to the heart of an issue and solving it.
I think it's I definitely agree with you around the fact that boards can be firstly older, male, and also quite white, depending on where you are in the country. But I think it's one of those things where you don't want to attack it too much, because the fact that they're there in that board role, it comes from a really good place. It comes from
Absolutely.
A point of, they wanted to help, they had some time. Where I think it goes really tits is the fact that we often
it's not a swear, almost a swear.
That is nothing. I think it comes from this sense that we think about diversity as being something that's integrated through a business, but we forget that it's not a really diverse business unless diversity is also at the top. And I think what people forget is that diversity isn't just what you look like, but diversity is about, thought. Have you got people who think in a different way?
Absolutely.
So it is, I suppose I'm asking you these questions about boards because I don't know how you do it. It must be really challenging sometimes within that environment. You must have to have really difficult conversations.
You do, but I think when you're I think there's a difference between being on a board and having those difficult conversations. Maybe we come back to that in a second. And actually, if you have been brought in to solve a problem, actually, I always kind of have my convictions. I will present recommendations, present solutions that are really evidence-based. So I think it's about bringing that to life. So you'll be conscious of, and I always actually before these sessions, this is a really important point, we'll always have a quick 15-minute phone call with every member of the board in kind of early stages of these sessions. And that's to really, it's to introduce myself, but it's to really understand what they want to get out of this piece of work, what their current understanding is, and to get a bit of the lay of the land before you suddenly see them all in the room together. And that's a really useful thing that I would encourage people to do. But then within the session, you kind of know really how people are going to respond. I mean, it depends what you're presenting, what you're discussing, doesn't it? I think there will always be people who are more aligned to different areas of the business, potentially going to kind of feel the pain of a decision more. But it's about always putting the organisation's needs first and kind of front and centre of that. And I think in the charity sector, actually, that in some ways is much easier than a business, because actually, as long as you're focusing on your end mission, focusing on your beneficiaries, you've evidenced that, then actually it is quite hard to argue with that.
Sure. I guess as well, because like you say, you're able to really focus on that. Whereas sometimes in business, I think people don't always have an honest, particularly owner-managed businesses, family businesses, you're not necessarily having an honest conversation because what they might say is what they're driving towards isn't the truth. Sometimes it's much more like egocentric than what people, and they're not prepared to sit in a room and say that. But it does make the conversation harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think listening is really important as well. So it's about really understanding people's responses and giving people time as well. And I think kind of a piece of advice for any kind of contentious meeting is always to kind of pick off people in advance and have those one-to-one conversations, not throw up surprises within meetings, so that people learn and digest information in so many different ways. So I think it's about tailoring to their needs. So it all comes back to people and understanding them, what makes them tick and what they need. That's the heart of all of this, really.
Sure. It's probably being respectful as well, isn't it? Even though you might not necessarily agree with where they are, I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes as to why they've got there.
And I mean, increasingly though, I think boards are being kind of really well crafted and structured. So there's, I think in days of old, people would be potentially asked to join boards because of their status or because of a position they held elsewhere, because of what they might bring, obviously because of what they might bring to an organisation in terms of connection. And I think that's still absolutely a valid role, but actually increasingly people are really creating proper tailored role profiles and looking at the skills that they need and the diversity of skills that they need across their boards, as well as a diversity in terms of gender and background as well. And I think that really makes a difference. When I was approached to join the board of First Light, which is a charity I'm on the board of, I was approached specifically because they wanted somebody with fundraising expertise, and the chair and the CEO at the time who contacted me about that, I was part sold on the organisation and what it does, and I was passionate about that anyway. But it was their kind of absolute rigour in what they were looking for, and actually, they really grilled me around what I could bring, what my experience was, how I changed things. But that was what absolutely drew me to want it to kind of join and to have that impact. And similarly, they created a board that has got really specific roles and responsibilities, and that again, that makes it much easier within those board meetings to know your place and to what you're taking responsibility for, where you can add that value as well. Because I think no one wants to be on a board where they're just kind of sitting there not really sure what they're doing. And I think when you haven't got that clarity, people maybe speak for the sake of speaking.
That's my least favorite person in a board capacity, is just like, I feel the need to comment. It's like, you don't have to, right? So one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was so particularly in the third sector, what do you see as the kind of common challenges for charities and non-profit organizations in general, but I guess also particularly from a marketing and fundraising perspective?
Yeah, so should we put COVID to one side for a second?
Let's pretend that didn't happen.
That's obviously a huge impact across the whole sector. But I think I think it's about the increasing competition within the space. So everyone is vying harder than ever for people's attention and for people's money. So that comes down to creating specific marketing challenges, which will be the same as any brand. That's it's about creating that cut through, that relevance, that belief and connection in the brand and in the product, and really tailoring that to your audience. I think there's something about trust in the sector. So trust in big institutions is obviously something that has been kind of eroding across the board for a number of years, and there've been a fair few charity scandals in the last few years. So I think that that transparency is really important. It's partly there's a lot of fake news, isn't there, and kind of cutting through that and really showing what you're doing. We talked about the younger generation earlier. I think they are more choosy. They really want to see where their money's going. They want to make really considered choices. So being able to package what you do in a way that's relevant to them is really important. Show the impact that you're going to make, and show the change that is happening in a really relevant way. And that is increasingly harder, and it's hard to do in a kind of tailored way at a mass level as well, or hard to do well. I think there's something about really being flexible in the way you respond to your audiences as well. So it's about giving people the right opportunity to get involved at the right time. It's not kind of deciding that somebody's supported you in one way or given to you in one way and then just kind of hammering them with asks for that thing. It's about really presenting a range of products to them. It is as with all kind of marketing challenges, about putting that customer, that supporter at the heart of what you're doing. I think there's also something about the role of charities overall, and now it's much easier to give directly to a beneficiary, because the whole shift in technology means that is easier, and actually technology as a whole is a challenge for charities. It's expensive. The kinds of skills you need to really embrace that are expensive. And for organisations where spend is so considered and so important, that is tough, and they can sometimes be left behind.
What are you seeing? Is there a risk that certain charities are just going to ignore some of this stuff? Are you seeing that, or are you seeing kind of like an engagement in these issues?
There's definitely engagement in these issues. I think COVID has actually really helped that. So I think for lots of organisations, there kind of was this knowledge that there was a need to change, but kind of no burning platform to do that. And I think actually the last year has really accelerated that, and challenging in so many ways, but there are definitely some positives that have come out of that. I think particularly in the digital space, actually people have been forced to create new products and deliver their services in new ways, and I'm just not sure they would have got to that point without the immediate necessity to do that. I think it's also forced people to really think about their relevance. How do they really communicate what they need right now when funds are really tight?
This I think if there is a positive of like you say, the pandemic, it has caused people to rapidly consider the need for digital transformation. If they weren't particularly engaged digitally or were doing it poorly, it's massively accelerated this sense of, you know, you're going to get completely left behind ultimately, aren't you?
Absolutely. I think the other thing it's really fostered, which was needed within the sector, is a sense of collaboration. I think we've talked about this before, haven't we? There's you think that that kind of naturally would happen within the sector, and to a certain extent it does, but essentially you are all competing for people's attention, for people's money. So, you know, that there is that sense of competition, but there has been much more of a focus on collaborating around messaging. So things like, you know, a group of cancer charities have got together to talk about cancer as an issue overall, knowing that their voice will be much louder as one than separately. And it's the kind of thing that, you know, that feels like it's just common sense, but you sometimes need to be forced to make those things happen.
But I think it's interesting from a kind of I say customer, but, you know, like donator perspective as well, in the you know, particularly with things like cancer charities. You know, I don't think you're necessarily going to be like, well, I really support this one, but I'm really anti these other cancer charities. Yeah. And so therefore collaboration makes sense from a donator's perspective, because what you're creating is this ability for you to support the issue more widely.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's definitely... Do you think there's sort of, in some of these spaces as well, there's stuff that the private sector could be learning from the third sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's the key lessons they could learn. There's something about focus.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think comms, is an area for me where the charity sector does like comms really well in a lot of ways, because they've set up this process of saying, okay, we're going to have your donation, we're going to keep telling you about what you donated about. And that's something that can be a big gap in the private sector, in that, you know, we might just like ping over a load of generic emails or whatever, but we're not necessarily commsing around.
I suppose what you're talking about there is what we would call loyalty comms. So
sure.
Which that kind of real backbone of just ensuring that you're keeping the brand fresh and you know, building that engagement, building that connection to the brand ongoing, so that at the right time for that next ask, people are feeling warm to you, so that you're front of mind.
But I think where the charity sector does it well is, you know, maybe this is my perception and I'm not right at all, but it's I think where you guys do it well is around the fact that you really hook on to the particular interest or pain point of the donator. So it's not necessarily like generic blast comms, but it could be quite tailored. You know, and
that's really interesting, because I think that's definitely a gap across a lot of charities. That's definitely something that comes up. People want to be a lot better at that.
Well, you know what? I think
sounds like you've had some great experiences.
I know. That gorilla I get updated about all the time. But I do think maybe that's something that's across the board, because it sounds like it's so easy, and actually tailored comms for small and medium-sized businesses particularly, it's very expensive and hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But have you got any other areas where you think charities do it really well and the private sector could learn, or actually do you think charities need to learn?
I think it's really interesting to be asked that question, because I'm always asked the question the other way around. Constantly as I come in, it's, you know, it's what can we learn,
in the private sector?
So because and for me that is things like that, you know, responding to the pace of change, it's the technology side of things, investing in transformation, being adaptive, all those kinds of things. And actually I often talk about the kind of the comms and tailoring to audiences specifically, because I tend to think that in the commercial sector that happens more effectively. So that's really interesting.
I think you're probably right that it's much more advanced out in larger businesses, but for smaller businesses, you know, that personalization and segmentation element, you know, you have to have invested fairly heftily into a CRM to achieve that. And
that's so challenging, isn't it, when you kind of get the level of expectation that people have when they're dealing with their Amazons, their Googles on a daily basis. You can't hope to compete with that. So
I guess there's like the sweet spot when you're really small, where you literally can put a note in saying, you know, and then you've got the other end. And I think where it's hard is in the middle, where you've probably got a load of data that you don't really have enough information about.
And I think the other thing with giving is that actually you often have far fewer touch points. So often, you will give once to a particular organisation in a few years, and you can almost be forced into thinking from a kind of CRM perspective that means that person is no longer a supporter if they've given and they haven't given for the next few years. But actually, if you think of people's relationship with giving, that might be very, very natural. It's very, very different as a product, and it changes so kind of widely across people's life cycle and life experience.
Talk to me about campaigns. So you must be pretty clued into the campaigns in the sector and also, I guess, more widely. What campaigns do you think, putting aside Stand Up to Cancer, because I know that was one of yours, but what campaigns do you think have worked really well? And then and why, what was the real message that you think was just yeah, bang, they got that right? Tough question. I've never seen a campaign in my life.
Why have I gone blank?
I'm trying to think of one that I thought.
Did you cut this bit out?
Not now. I've put you on the spot without actually.
I know, and I think it's because I don't want to say the obvious ones.
So I tell you who I think have done really well is the in the US of A. So I think multiple ones. So the fact that they turned the Met Gala, because that's a fundraiser, so that's obviously started from a little bit of a private celebration, and they've transformed it over the years into this absolute, the money they must raise from things like that. There's a few examples of that as well, actually, where, and okay, I admit you have to probably be a celebrity, but essentially what you're doing is creating a brand around fundraising events. And it's there's another one where there's a model whose name I forget, and she's done a similar thing where she basically uses her connections within the fashion sector and creates a huge event. All of the fashion labels come and support it, all of the celebrities come and support it. And I guess for me, the reason why I think stuff like that's really good is because they're using the profile that they have, the connections that they have, and they're building a brand that people want to be seen at, and they almost are forgetting the purpose. Then you need to be reminding people of what the purpose is. Is, from your point of view, that a good thing that you're building a brand and it's sort of?
I think those ones are quite interesting because they are probably the majority of they will raise huge amounts of money, but it will be gifts of $10 million or more. So it's huge in terms of the fundraise, and I think the awareness is great. I think where they could really kind of shift the dial is if they then had a great way for people at a mass level to get involved in a much smaller way as well.
Sure. So what I guess I'm interested in is if you've got any advice for sort of younger marketers and stuff, and not just marketers, creators, communicators coming through, maybe around how they want to be perceived, but also how they should be behaving. I don't mean that in terms of their own behavior, but I mean in the sense of, like you said, be strategic about who you're talking to and how you're presenting information. Have you got anything where you think, God, I really wish somebody had said to me?
I think it's being really kind of comfortable and confident in kind of what but I think it is about building that evidence. So I think kind of going back to that, there's a huge science behind marketing. So it's drawing out the evidence that underpins what you're saying, and then I think it's putting that kind of creative wrapper on it and presenting it in a way that it kind of really lands well with people. But I think in order to do that, so it's about understanding who your audience are. I mean, I think that's probably the key insight at all levels of this. When you're creating communications, creating marketing, you really need to understand who your audience are and what the product is you're packaging, why it meets their needs. And I think it's the same if you're delivering recommendations or dealing with people. It's understanding what their needs are and how you best meet them.
One of the things you said, which I think also resonates, is where sometimes when you're speaking to boards, there's issues that they weren't aware of, and and sometimes there is issues that they are. And I think one of the things I think that it's difficult for marketers, particularly if you're on your own in an SME, you can end up being siloed off from the business, and it's almost marketing is like a separate arm. And often what is considered to be a marketing challenge might be a product challenge or a service challenge or an HR catastrophe waiting to happen. And, I think from what you're saying, it's the same when you're dealing with boards, is that, sometimes you can, lift up a rock expecting to find like a beetle, and actually what you've got is like a, I don't know, bee's nest.
And that's, really that's what no, it's not that. I mean, the one I always use is that you tug a thread and then you just keep tugging, and it's and actually then more threads appear, and you suddenly end up with so much more. But I think that kind of honest communication, regular communication, kind of building a strong relationship with whoever you're working with is key as well. I mean, I always just set out to be really honest. I kind of state that at the beginning. That's the way I work. And
I think in those kinds of scenarios, when you do end up with like the entire ball of thread instead of just a single one, it's not your job necessarily. And I say this as a marketer and as a consultant, it's not your job necessarily to make a decision as to whether or not that's dealt with. If the board then turn around, or your manager turns around and says like, can you just push that back in, then that there's nothing you can do about that. Yeah. But actually, I think what you have to be comfortable with is this sense of, I'm not going to take on this problem.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think, though, one thing I've definitely learned is, people do love a problem solver. That's something that can really help move you forward. So I think it might not be your solution to own, but I think coming prepared with ways to attack a problem or solve a problem can stand you in really good stead. I think there's something for what you said before, though, about really making sure you're clear on what your role is. So you talked about, actually, it's not a marketing issue. It could be a product issue or a service issue. And I think, not being afraid to say, actually, this is what I can do about this. But in order for that to really shift, actually, this needs to happen over here and this needs to happen over here. And you can do that in a really, in a really open, supportive way. So, I think it is about, going back to what we were saying about that kind of agile approach as well. It's about being clear who does what and how those roles fit together.
I think go on, sorry.
I was going to say, I think it can be really hard when you are the lone marketeer in an organisation. Really, really hard, because you're somehow seen as the kind of fluffy bit on the side often, but also you're seen as the solution to loads and loads of problems. So I think being really clear on what that role of marketing can play for that organisation, and unpicking exactly what it can do at a certain point in time, and maybe what the journey is to kind of how you grow that function and how that can look long term is really clear. I think enabling people to understand that roadmap, so the fact that they're not necessarily going to see immediate change, then actually there's a lot of test and learn involved in marketing. There's the kind of basic level of the kind of foundations, but then there are so many layers on top of that. It's really helpful, and finding a person or people within the organisation that really understand that.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is like I think you're not necessarily going to go into a business as a marketer and be used in the way that we should be used. You might, like you said, we sometimes are like the add-on on this side, but there's an education that that you can deliver as that marketer to the business, saying, not just demanding more respect and budget, but essentially demonstrating how marketing should integrate with a business. And although that you can spot issues with, for example, service or a sales process, that doesn't mean that you are single-handedly going to be able to, I often think of all this stuff as it's like a jigsaw, but when you move a piece, all the other pieces move. That's a businesses and, charities alike. They're an interwoven mass, aren't they?
Yeah.
So
I think something that can really help in that is really enabling people to see what good could look like. So I think bringing in examples is really helpful. And I think also looking to a competitor that is doing well and almost doing an audit of their marketing and then doing an audit of yours can be a really great comparison exercise to bring to life, for people.
Sure, I really, completely agree. Bit of competitor analysis. I also think don't be afraid to bring in outside resource. Like, don't be afraid to say, okay, I'm not getting my point across. Who could help me get my point across?
That is such a good point. And I think, again, as a consultant, as a freelancer, I think you can often feel like you have to kind of prove your worth, you have to know everything. But actually, one of the things I've done right from the beginning is collaborate, bring people in, bring in the experts. If someone is better at something than you, bring them in. It will only stand you in good stead. And absolutely.
I'm the same. I flat refuse. Like, I'll literally say, I can do this bit for you, but I can't do this bit, but I know who can. Because I don't want to get the reputation of being like a bit of a like player.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
I think that kind of self-awareness, kind of authenticity in what you do is so important.
And I think we don't have to feel like we are like a single-handed problem solver. Like, this stuff is complex, and I think that's what business is complex, marketing is complex. Like you said, it's this weird collaboration between science and art. You might be really good at the science but struggle with the art, and vice versa. And
also it's an evolving industry. It's changing all the time. And you kind of want to keep fresh, you bring in new insights, bring new learnings. And look, going back to that diversity point, we will have a certain view of a situation, and I think you need that diversity of views when you're looking at your marketing as well. I mean, that's why I think something like the Marketing Forum is great, because what you are really doing is creating space for people to connect, discuss these issues. I miss your in real life events, but hopefully they'll be back soon.
I know. I sort of miss them and sort of don't, because they're a real nightmare. But I mean, that's literally why I wanted to start it, because I was the lone 23-year-old marketer in a business where I was like, so what does a day's marketing look like? I didn't know, my manager didn't know, and the business didn't know. So I was talking to my friend about it the other day. If I hadn't been lucky enough to have a role that required me to do some networking, I wouldn't have met the people that were doing the same as me, experiencing the same problems. And we just, we all probably would have, I don't know, been rubbish.
No, I mean, that's another good point. You asked for kind of any advice to younger people, and I think do reach out. I think you can have this real fear, like even about connecting with senior people on LinkedIn, but reach out, ask people for advice, ask people for coffees. People are really flattered generally by that, and people like to help. And there's brilliant networks of people that are just keen to share what they learn, share what they know, and help.
I do it now. I will, if I find somebody interesting and I think that, what they're doing resonates with me, I'll like DM them on Instagram, and you'd be surprised at the number of people that are prepared to share and have a conversation and, have a Zoom where you're like, I just liked what you do, so I just thought it'd be cool to talk about it.
I do the same. And actually, this is a slight tangent, but I think that is what a lot of charities do really well, is involve their supporters or their service users in kind of co-creation of their comms and marketing. So they will have groups of supporters that they share the creative process with to really make sure it resonates.
That's good.
And I think I've seen some really great and unexpected insights come from doing that. So things that you just wouldn't have spotted unless you went through that process.
So kind of like user groups.
Yeah.
We don't do enough of that in there's no time. That's a problem. We need to get this thing live. Don't ask anybody what they think of it. Poppy, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let me know when you think of a campaign that you like. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Marketing Forum podcast. If you are not already, please do like and subscribe. And you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our mailing list to find out more about episodes coming your way soon.